We are going to start the fall of Israel and Judah. We're only going to take 2 sessions, I think maybe 3, but probably just 2 sessions on this. And the first one we're going to cover is Tel Dan. I probably don't need to tell you this, but let me tell you. Tel Dan is a real tell. Did you like how I told you that? Remember how we talked before that a tell is a mound that looks like a mountain, but it's like a multi-layered cake, and it's each different civilization in time. And the one that's up here is the newest, and the one that's down here next to bedrock is the oldest. Well, Tel Dan it's huge. It has an immense amount of history. We are actually our focus, of course, is beyond the Davidic layer here up to the Babylonian captivity, that 500 years. But this city has literally 7,000 years worth of history. It's incredible. So that's what we're going to be covering tonight. It's been in use from before the time of Abraham all the way up until the 6-Day War in 1967. This has a lot of layers to it. And the rocks are going to tell the story of this place. I know, they're all bad puns. I know. Tonight what we're going to do, normally what we've tried to do is work our way up from the oldest to the newest. But tonight when we're dealing with Tel Dan, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the newest, what's taking place there now and and work our way down. We won't get all the way to bedrock to the Abrahamic layer, not quite, but we're going to go a long ways. And so instead of going oldest to newest, we're going to go newest to oldest, and you'll see why in a minute. Tel Dan, this is Dan, way up here. This is Israel. This is Lebanon. This is Syria, okay? And that's Jordan down there, but they are way up here at the very top. I mean, they are at the top point. It's Israel's northernmost city. It's at the base, which you can't see in this picture. Maybe a little bit here. It's right at the base of Mount Hermon. It's 24 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And it's always been located on the highway called the Via Maris. And that was the trade route that went from Egypt all the way into Europe. It went up and around, and then it went east into Asia. And it was literally a cross point. It went east and west and north and south. And because it's on this route, it got all kinds of traffic. And you might remember when we talked about it with Abraham, when Abraham got the call to go into the Promised Land, he traveled that road, and he would have come through Tel Dan, and he would have gone through Hatzor. Now, Hatzor was later, but he would have gone through that area. And it's a distinct possibility he would have went into the city of Tel Dan. What you see here in the distance, if I remember this picture correctly, this is actually Lebanon, although it may be Syria. But, I mean, you couldn't, we're talking a tree line away. It's extremely close. It's the very tip of their border. This week, I will anyway. This week, the Iranian president, went to Lebanon, and I mean, it was like yesterday or the day before, and he came and looked across the border here. And, I mean, it came up in the news just the other day. But anyways, this was used as fortification for protection. I mean, they have bunkers here, they have dugouts where they had machine gun nests, observation points. They used this place as a fortified location all the way up until the Six-Day War in 1967. And you can actually go there and you can see those dugouts and you can see the bunkers that are still there. I mean, and then we're talking, 50 years ago. So, I mean, right now, what it is, it's a, I don't know what we call it here. We have parks like the Great Smoky Mountain National Park and Daniel Boone Forest, all of these places where you're limited on what you can do, and it's a preserve somewhat. That's the same thing here. It's an animal preserve, it's a wooded preserve, it's a water preserve, actually, and they still use it to this day. Here's that gate that we showed you back, whatever it was, 11, 12 weeks ago, where this is the gate of Leshem, where Abraham probably would have gone through. If he would have went into the city, which is most likely on his travels, he would have went through that gate. It's excellent. I mean, and it's still preserved. It's a mud gate, made of mud, They filled this in so it wouldn't collapse, but it's the second oldest mud gate intact in the entire world. They found it in 1979. It's 23 feet high. In 1350 BC, the gate here, this was called Leshem or Laish, is depending on your translation, but it was renamed Dan, and we'll talk about why it was renamed Dan tonight. But what's amazing is, this being from the time of Abraham, that's 2,000 years ago. 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago. When they did the excavations, they found basalt carved vessels, flint tools, and primitive pottery that they dated to 5,000 BC. So, we're talking the time of the flood. We're talking about Noah's sons. Very old. Now, we know that the dating, it can fluctuate quite a bit, but regardless, we're talking ancient is what they found here. This is an overhead view from Mount Hermon. Down here is Dan. This is Caesarea Philippi that we will talk about. It's also called Banis. We will talk about that when we come up to Jesus' time. But here's Dan, right at the foot of the mountain. Water, when it snows, and it has snow on it, and I'll show you a picture, all winter long. As that snow melts, the water comes down off the mountain, goes down into springs, and comes out. And one of the places that it comes out heavily, and we'll show you that, is Dan. And from this water, it moves to it becomes, from the springs, the Jordan River. The Jordan River feeds the Sea of Galilee. It then goes from the Sea of Galilee, continues in the Jordan River, down to the Dead Sea where it ends. But it feeds all of that. So most of northern Israel, all of the greenery that you have, or what little you might have, all comes from this area. Okay? The UN they call this a buffer zone because, like I said, you are right over there's Lebanon, this is Syria. Where you're right there. They have a permanent structure there that they call the Hermon Hotel. And because of all of the problems there, that is where the UN is stationed on top of this mountain, just because there's so many problems there. When you think of the Golan Heights would be over here. If you hear about it, that's where they shoot off the rockets that hit Israel and all that. And that's actually one of the places that we stayed. Yep. Huh? Actually, we did. Although there was one night that I wasn't sure if I heard something or not, and it was while I was there. But it was probably because I was, thinking about it. Yeah. This is looking up to Mount Hermon. When we were actually there and we were at Tel Dan, it was a real misty, foggy day. We couldn't see anything. We went up and drove up on this mountain. It was like hand in front of your face type fog. So we never even got to see any of its beauty. And our guides were all disappointed because they were like, oh, you should see how beautiful it is. And we couldn't. I want to ask you, do you all know what a 16th of an inch is in size?
It's one of the dashes on the...
Yeah. If you have a normal tape measure, it's like the second smallest dash on your tape measure. Some tape measures go down to 30 seconds. Most go to 16ths. So it's either the second or the smallest dash, one or the other, okay? It's tiny. It's that big. 4 foot, if you were to measure out 4 feet, and you had that much, a 16th of fall, in that 4 feet, would you consider that a lot? Yeah, that's pretty level. In fact, when building anything, framers, I mean, we usually go within 8, and we're okay, which is double, of course, of the 16th, right? How minuscule is that little 16th? Now, I want us to come back to that, but I want you to think about that as we go through all of this story of Tel Dan and the tribe of Dan. Mount Hermon is the tallest point in all of Israel. It stands at 9,232 feet at its peak, at its highest level, highest point. To put it in perspective, Mount Mitchell in North Carolina is the tallest point of the Appalachian Mountains, where we reside, okay? It sits at 6,684 feet. So at the tallest point of all of our Appalachian Mountains, Mount Hermon sits a third taller than that. Okay? So it's pretty big. That's pretty cool. But what's interesting is if you go 34 miles to the south, Mount Hermon, its waters feed the Dead Sea that far away. That's how far it is, 134 miles south. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on earth, and it is minus 1,408 feet in elevation. I know this is probably great math and you're all loving this, but that's a difference of 10,640 feet. That's a massive amount of drop in 134 miles. Now, granted, we're used to some mountains where there's a sheer cliff, but we're talking about the average. If you go from the top of Mount Hermon down to the Dead Sea, it's 10,000, almost 11,000 feet drop. The difference is essentially 1/16 in every 4 feet is what the drop is. If you do the average. When I did the math, it was pretty close. When you think about, I don't even think you could imagine 10,600 feet going straight up. But when you add it together, it's a 16th of an inch in every 4 feet. How important is a 16th of an inch? It doesn't seem like much, but we'll talk about why it is. So the water comes off Mount Hermon, and it comes down into this beautiful nature reserve. It's honestly one of the prettiest places in all of Israel. It reminded me of home in Michigan when I was a kid. It is the major water source that does feed. The Jordan River comes out of here. And it feeds most, if not all, of northern Israel's water supply. It's only about 25 acres in size, but it's been in use forever. They found in excavations up to 4 water mills. And this picture here it's my right, your left, is actually one where you can see where they had a water wheel here. And that water wheel was in use all the way up until the 1960s. So it's just constant. And there's bubbling water. It's loud. It's beautiful. There's all their notes, and I won't go into all that. But it stays cool, even in the summer heat, all the way through the day. it stays cool because of this water and how high the elevation is. It's the only, by the way, it's the only water wetlands forest in all of Israel, because everything else is mainly desert. The streams are rushing so quickly. They are so loud, you cannot keep a normal conversation. You can't hear yourself talk. It's that loud. But man, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm not a photographer, but I wouldn't mind making a puzzle out of that, right? If you've ever walked in the woods, like after a rain, and you smell the fresh smell, the moist air, the cool, that's what it felt like all over Tel Dan when we were there. It was gorgeous. It really was. That water is ice cold, freezing. But it reminded me of growing up in Michigan as a boy. Just that cool feeling. It is still in, we wouldn't call this an excavation. This is more of a reconstruction. This is at the top. We'll talk about it later, but they are rebuilding some of the walls that they have found. And they were still doing this. I mean, obviously you can see while we were there. That was them throwing out their mud buckets. I thought it was funny. But this is them reworking some of the walls. It's still a work in progress. I mean, this is how up to date the archaeology is. When the tribe of Dan couldn't drive out the Philistines, when they received their allotment of land in Joshua, they searched out another area to come and live, and they found this place that is rare in Israel. It is a tranquil, water plentiful, peaceful place. And they're like, yeah, that's where we want to live. So they went and killed everybody and took it. That's what happened. It was a well-fortified city. The walls were 30 to 50 feet tall and 25 feet wide. And this is an artist rendition. Kind of gives you an idea of what it looked like. This is the plaza that we will be talking about shortly. And this is the city gate. And I wish you could see it a little bit better, but that's the city gate where the leaders would have dealt with all their business. This is that plaza that I just mentioned. Right here is the outside of the walls. This is where all the people of the town would meet, do their business, do some of their worship, etc. This is it. They did it. You can see, this is just the reconstructed walls to give you an idea what it looked like. And this is nothing compared to what it actually was. So you can imagine trying to take that city, which the Israelites did relatively easy. Here's a further picture. If I turned a little bit on my camera, this is that plaza where I'm talking about. And all of these rocks, it was difficult to walk on, actually. As we go in from the plaza, we go through, and this enters towards the city gate. And this is where all of the business would have taken place. This is where the leaders of the city would be, the king. Notice he's got a little canopy over here, and they do as well. And the posts, they've still got these posts. At the beginning they found them. But this is where he would have sat and done all of the city business. And I show you that because here's where he sat. This is his seat. And here's where those posts, the wood would have set down on those, and then it would have been a canopy over top. And so when you hear about Lot, when you read that story of Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, sitting at the city gate, that's what he was doing. And this is where he would have sat. It gives you just, a picture in your mind, as it were. And there's another picture of it. Here's the steep grade that I was talking about, and that lady fell right over here. But it's a pretty steep, winding grade. Down there is the city gates, and you come up and around. So this is where we turn, and you can now see there's another path. There's actually a lot of people, but you have one more path yet, and you had to go up to get there. And there is just these huge rocks everywhere. This place was so fortified, I can't imagine trying to take it as a town. So now we have gone almost all the way up the city, and there's been what you would have seen would have been shops along the side. You would have seen people's houses. you would have seen government buildings all along the side of these walls, and you would have wound around this path, this marketplace, to get up to where we're going. And here's the second path, and then on top of this, just on the other side of this wall, is the top of the city that I want you to see. But before we get there, I want to take us back down to the plaza where we first started to show you what they found during their excavation. And then we'll come back up to this peak. So as I said, this is a picture of that plaza where they did all of their business, where they talked, etc., outside the city walls. I want you to notice this little marker right here, because I'm going to zoom in on it. This is that marker I was just pointing at. I take you there because I want you to see in general the idea of where they found what they found. This, when you hear the Bible talk about setting up a high place where they did worship to other gods, that's a high place. That's what it is. That's where they would burn incense to other gods, where they did their worship of other gods. That's what it is. And this talks about in 2 Kings 23 when, I believe it was Joram, king of Judah, came up and he destroyed the high places and tried to set things right. But the reason I took you here, although I wanted you to know what a high place looked like, so the next time you read it, you have it in your mind. Beyond that, along this back of this wall is where they found this piece. And the lady was just working, and the sun was shining down, and all of a sudden, she's looking at this wall, and she sees something glimmering. It just looks different from the sunshine. And it was a basalt carving is what it looked like. So in 1992, from the 1970s to 1992, we've talked about the minimalists that believe the Bible is not historical fact, it is spiritual facts. And so you take spiritual, that's what they're trying to write. You don't worry about the history because it's probably wrong. We take very little of the history. It's not that important. That's what the minimalists believe. They take a minimal view of Scripture. Well, in 1992, there had been virtually nothing found of David, King David. And they were making claims that King David either didn't exist, he was a fictitious figure, just like Goliath. If he was a king, he was essentially a warlord. There was a scientist that published an article in 1992 discussing all of this, that David was just fictitious. In less than a year, the sun shines down out of the sky onto the wall, and this lady's standing there and looks at it and says, that looks like an inscription. So she goes to get the man that's over the whole dig, and he comes over, and by his own, forgive me for how I say this, but by his own admission, he says, "Oh my God, we found an inscription." And it was by God that they found it. It was literally the light from heaven. It was just a cool story. She said she saw the light from heaven come down, and it just looked different than everything else. Well, they find this inscription. And on the inscription, this huge chunk, it says, the house, or Bet David, the house of David. Now, the Bible references David's kingly lineage 25 times that exact way. Bet David, the house of David. So everybody gets up in arms. They're all excited. What's great is they found it in this wall, but it was stuck in that wall. They took whatever this carving was and they put it in the wall as a piece to just block it up. And it was in the 800 BC. So they knew whoever didn't care about this writing at all. But because it was from that time period, that means it had to be that time period, because you're not just going to go out, cut a chunk out of the wall and stick this in it. No, they built around it. So they were using it essentially as a brick. Well, the minimalists hated that they found this because it messed up their narrative. So then they went they tried every which way to make it say something else, something different. I mean, they threw out all kinds of ideas, including in less than a year, between 92 and 93, they even wrote an article saying that the guy and lady that found this actually dug a spot out and put it in place as a fake. I mean, that's how far they went with this, because they didn't want to just accept what it said. So then, in 1993, less than a year after them writing that article, they are continuing on this dig, and over here to this side over here, they find 2 more pieces of that stone. What's amazing is these are the 3 pieces, and you see them all fitting together perfectly the way they are. There's no way they could have made a fake out of this. It just doesn't work. Well, here's part A. This is the first one they found. This is, I'll call it part B. I'm not sure if it's the second one or not, but just to show you the difference. And then down here, this one that comes in behind, that's part C. Whatever happened to this thing, it was purposely destroyed and then used as flooring and walls. I mean, they really were upset with whatever this was. Although part A said Bet David, house of David, parts B and C added information that they really didn't like, because he literally names 3 different people besides David in this stele that are mentioned in the scriptures during the same exact time period as when the scriptures were written. Couldn't make it up. Couldn't make it up. So here is where, actually, this is the bet right here, and that's the David. I don't know, you can't really tell it from this picture the way it is. But if you look closely, you will see that this little section right here is a lighter color in the letters being carved out than anything else. And it's because somebody went and filled in those letters that are carved with something to make them stand out. Almost like if you have a carving and you put white paint on it and then you scratch it all off and then the letters stand out real bright. You know, that's exactly what. Because they wanted everybody to see this. B and C adds information talking about King Hazael of Damascus, and in it, he's gloating. Now, it could be either him or it could be Jehu. There's some difference. Most people believe it's Hazael, but some believe it may be Jehu. And I don't know, it might be. But regardless, whoever it is gloating that they killed one of the kings of Israel and one of the kings of the David, the house of David. We'll go further. It's possible, now this would be part A, this would be part B, and this would be find C, okay, where they fit together. During antiquity, what they would do is a king would make either a bust of himself or like a full-on statue. And then he would have someone write stories about him, what we would call propaganda. Self-aggrandizing himself, saying how great he is, and all of his wonderful victories. And so it's a distinct possibility that this is what it actually was. And the reason it's chipped up like this is because they want to knock his head off, literally. They didn't find the head. It's a possibility that they beat that thing into pebbles, I don't know, just to prove that he was defeated, you know. Because in other places we've talked about, what did they do? With the statues of the other gods and everything, they would cut their hands off and they would cut their head off. Well, it could be what this is. They don't know because they haven't found his head. But these other pieces have been destroyed as well. And here's some other steles and inscriptions with statues that do the same thing. And there's several different ones. But anyways, this is how big it is. This is the actual stele. And you can see it even if you were to come up closer, you could see in the picture how the letters are whiter than all the rest of them because somebody highlighted it. But this is our guy, Guido, and you can kind of tell, it was pretty big. It's like that big. It's a massive size. And I just wanted to show you that so you could see the size comparison. Here's what it says, and this is the translation that they have. Now, some of them are in parentheses because obviously it's chipped up so bad some of the words are gone, but this is what it says. And cut blank, my father went up against him when he fought at blank, and my father lay down. He went to his ancestors. In other words, he was killed. And the king of Israel entered previously into my father's land, and Hadad made me king. And Hadad went in front of me, and I departed from the 7 somethings of my kingdom. And I slew 70 kings who harnessed thousands of chariots, thousands of horsemen or horses. I killed Joram, son of Ahab, the king of Israel, and I killed Ahaz, son of Jehoram, king of the house of David. Now there's 2 Jorams. There's one that's in the Israel line, and then there's one that's in the Judah line. And he mentions killing both of them. And I set their towns into ruins and turned their land into desolation. And Jehu ruled over Israel, and I laid siege upon them to ends. He mentions 3 different people besides the house of David. And it's all in the same time period. Now, the biblical narrative is different than this one. And there's 2 possibilities here. First, he could be just lying, saying that he did all this when he really didn't. The second, and he kind of makes mention of it down here, and Jehu ruled over Israel. It's possibility that Jehu and Hazael made an alliance. And from our biblical narrative, we come to find out that Jehu was the one that killed those 2 guys. They had come together. He kills the one, and he shoots an arrow at Ahaz of Judah, and Ahaz tries to escape and flee away, and he ends up dying in Megiddo to the west. But regardless, Jehu was the one that did it. And it's a possibility that he's saying, yeah, I did it because my protege, Jehu, did it for me. That's how a king would work anyway. If we did it, I was the one that did it, But it's very closely accurate with what we have in scriptures. And it was, like I said, written in time and then placed in time on that wall. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 15 through 17. Then the Lord said to him, which is Elijah, when he was at Mount Sinai, when he ran after Mount Carmel, this is what the Lord said, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, where we're at, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael king over Syria. Why would God have Elijah, his prophet, be putting up kings in Syria? Anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as a king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, yeah, I totally just butchered that one, Meholah, so shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. The passage literally talks about these same individuals and this same thing that would happen. Now here's our little diagram of the tribes. This is the Israel side. This is the Judah side. Here's Joram on the Judah side, and here's Joram right there on the Israel side. This is where we're taking place, right in this area. It fits exactly what we have in the scriptures. Now, I've just got this in quick notes because I didn't want to take a lot of time doing this, but I wanted you to still get it. 2 Kings chapter 12 and chapter 17 and 18, and 2 Kings chapter 8 verses 16 through 18, 1 Kings chapter 22 verse 44. Judah and Israel are trying to make an alliance. So the king of Judah marries Athaliah, who was Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. Not a good situation, because she wasn't a good lady. Remember we talked about she was the one who wanted to kill off all of her descendants and got all of them but one, and that was Joash that we talked about. Anyways, so they try to team up. Then Jehu, by God's hand, that we just read in 1 Kings, when he gave it to Elijah, Jehu comes out and he stages a coup against Joram and against Ahaziah. And they both died. Ahaziah later died in Megiddo, but Joram died there. Hazael was anointed, and it's a distinct possibility he took credit for Jehu's kill, or they had an alliance. Because then later on, it tells us that Jehu was on the throne of Israel, and that Hazael, and that they gave land to Hazael east of the Jordan, Israel did. And so it's almost like Jehu said, all right, now that I'm king here, you can have some of these cities, is the idea. All right, I think that's all of it. So now that we've talked about all of the killing and what they found in this fantastic stele that is just amazing, I want to take us back to that place where we stopped before going up to the top, because I want to go back a little bit more in time. We've talked about the city's destruction and the king's destruction. Now let's start to go back further and find out why this is the case. When you get to the top of the mound, it says right here, it says cultic site. Now what it means by cultic is it means it's a place of worship. It doesn't mean it was necessarily a cult. Could have been, and in this case it was, but it just means a place of worship. Here is the worship precinct of the top of this city. We come in here, and the very first thing you see on the right is the altar, where the animals are sacrificed. You go up here to the beam of the high place. Along the sides here are priestly chambers. There's altar chambers. There's incense chambers. And they found them all. And they found what they did in them. I mean, in the archaeology, it's amazing. This says, and the king made 2 calves of gold. He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Here are some of these rooms that go all the way around that were for worship. OSHA will love this place, I'm just telling you. But here's where they burnt. Oh, I should go back, excuse me. No, it doesn't have to. There it is. These are the places, this is where they burnt the incense before their gods. Okay? And here is the altar. Now, this steel structure is representative of how big this altar would have been. Jeroboam was the first king of Israel. Solomon's son Rehoboam was an idiot. And he lost the kingdom because he listened to bad advice, and, well, he was a spoiled brat. He wanted money. He wanted them to pay hard taxes. Well, the nation just said, forget it, and they split off, okay? So here's what took place. Jeroboam, he gets the idea that, wait a minute, we don't want them going back to Judah to go worship. We better set some places up here. So he sets up this altar, this massive altar, that you stand up against it, and it's taller than you are, okay? And he sets one in Bethel, down in south in Samaria. We talked about that one previously. But then he set this one up in Tel Dan. He wanted to solidify the kingdom for himself, that all of the 10 tribes of the north They would worship, and they would worship the gods, and everything would be hunky-dory. They wouldn't be going back to their old land. But of course, that is not what happened. This is the first, I don't want to call it the first step, but this is definitely it's not the first step of their falling away, their slipping from the Lord, but this is their first step definitely towards idolatry and worshiping these other gods. All centered around a golden calf. These are the things that they found. This is where the golden calf would have been set up. In the previous picture, we were actually sitting right over here as they were talking. This is the altar. There's the courts. Back over this way, and here, there you go, are the priestly rooms and chambers where they did, they burned incense and all. These, when they mention, by the way, the horns of the altar, we've talked about them a little bit, but when you hear that in the scriptures, where they hold onto the horns of the altar, that's the horn of the altar, and it was on each one of the four corners. But notice the differences between what we talked about when we talked about the tabernacle and this one. You see all these rocks? Was the tabernacle supposed to use hand-hewn rocks or natural? Natural. All of these are hand-hewn. Notice this. That's steps. They weren't supposed to have steps. They were supposed to have an incline. Because if you stepped and somebody saw your nakedness, it'd be a terrible thing. That's what they said. Now the horns on the altar are correct. So what he did was, he got his idea, Jeroboam got his idea of how they should worship. And then he took a few things back from what they had been worshiping. Okay. This is a further view. And again, you can see how tall and big it is compared to all of us standing there. All right, so 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 26 talks about this. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Oh, that's a hard trip. That's a long way. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. Does verse 28 sound familiar? Here, O Israel, are your calves that brought you up out of Egypt. That's what Aaron said at the base of Mount Sinai. That didn't work out very well. He quotes him without even realizing it. He set up one in Bethel, the other he put up in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. You remember, Dan's at the very top. It would have been easier to go to Jerusalem, but hey, Dan's a whole lot more fun. We get to do a whole lot more when we're worshiping up there than what we do down here. It became a sin for him. Verse 31, he made shrines on the high places, we showed you some of those, and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Oops, that's not right. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made, and to Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. He set the date, the same time that they would be going to Jerusalem. He said, oh no, just come up here. It's a whole lot easier. Just come up here. Come up here. Verse 33, so he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, and in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel, and offered sacrifices on the altar and burned incense. I should have went through and saw how many times it said, and he made offerings on the altar. Remember? That's what Saul lost his kingdom for. Because he was the one making the sacrifices. King wasn't supposed to be the priest. But hey, if you're going to not use the Levites, if you're not going to do it God's way, you can kind of do it however you want, right?
So is this for the Passover then?
I'm not sure if it was Passover, it was just one of the feasts. And it may have been that he just, I was thinking that it was the same, it was for the same time, but it may not have been. That would have been the fall feast. Yes, there are 7 feasts. That is correct. You were.
I was thinking there's 7, I wanted to see what they're in one pit.
Oh, there's, okay, well thank you. There's 7 that he made offerings. Regardless, do you see anything that he did wrong?
A lot of things.
A whole lot. A whole lot. So now I want to go back one more time and start talking about how their straying from God began. In Judges chapter 18, verse 27, it says, "So they, the Danites, took the things Micah had made." He was a priest, a Levite, but he was making his own idols because in the Judges' time, everybody did what was right in their own eyes. So they took the idols that he had made, and the priest who had belonged to him, they took his priest with him, and they went to Laish. Remember, Laish was Dan before it was Dan. To a people that were quiet and secure, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no ties with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth-Rehob, if I can say it. So they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish, or Leshem, depending on, again, on your translation. Then the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all of the time it was in the house of God. The house of God was in Shiloh. So it got heated where they were at when they received their land, and they decided instead of doing it the right way and staying and fighting and winning the land, they just took the easy route. And they found a place that was nice and secure. It was going to be easy to take because nobody would know if they were gone. And they went and took the city and they killed them all. They renamed it Dan. In fact, they put those walls on top of that gate that we saw that Abraham would have come through. Now, here's why it's important. They took the easy route. They left. They went as far away as they could from everybody else. And they took this land. Now, in Joshua chapter 19, verse 47, Joshua literally calls them out. He's talking about all of the land that's been distributed to all of the tribes. And this is what he says in verse 47. "And the border of the children of Dan went beyond these, because the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem and took it. And they struck it with the edge of the sword, took possession of it, and dwelt in the land. They called Leshem Dan after the name of Dan their father." Telling essentially the same story, but what it's saying is they had all this land, but then their land went like berserk. It went way over that way because they did something they weren't supposed to. I didn't even realize this until today, but Jacob, when he is on his deathbed, he prophesied over all of the families. This is what it says of Dan. Deuteronomy 33:22. "And of Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan." Long before they ever named the city Dan, Jacob knew that they were going to leave. He had prophesied that they were going to leap out of the land. So why is this important? Well, when we go back to our first study talking about the conquest, okay, we talked about Hatzor up here or right here, and that these kings all came up against Joshua and the children of Israel to fight him. And God said, "Don't worry about it, Joshua. I've got you. I've got it taken care of." And so they all came to fight. They gathered all their armies, and they came to fight in a little place right up here called Mizpah. It's above this little H. There's some water here, and in this valley of Hula, that's where they all fought them. When they fought them, and I made sure to mention it back then, Joshua chapter 11 verse 10 says, and Joshua turned back and destroyed Hatzor with fire. And so he's up here, he wins the battle against this massive army, as many as the sands of the sea, with as many chariots, innumerable number of chariots, and then he comes back, instead of taking all this other land, he comes back and he destroys Hatzor with fire. It makes mention of that so that you know for sure that Joshua came back. Well, why is that so important? Well, if you go to Genesis chapter 31, there is a meeting at that little place called Mizpah. Jacob is running from his father-in-law Laban. And he's running with his family, with his kids, with his livestock, everything, because he knows Laban's not going to be happy that he's leaving the home country. Laban finally catches up with Jacob at that little place called Mizpah. The night before he goes to attack Jacob and get his stuff back, God comes to Laban in a dream and says, you better not touch this man because he is mine. So the next morning they meet and they end up having a meal and they make a pact that says, Jacob, you never come north of Mizpah and I will never come south of it. We will never fight each other again. But the tribe of Dan, if this is Mizpah, they broke that promise. They took the easy way out, and in so doing, they broke a promise that was set by their forefather, Jacob. God is a God of keeping his promises. And when we fail to keep them, he holds us to them. They didn't. They did exactly the opposite. They broke that pact, and they turned and they took this nice little town, because it was all off by itself, seemed easy, and they broke the promise that their forefather had made all those years before. Now, I've always told you that names, places, numbers, dates, all of those are important, right? They're all in the scriptures on purpose. If I were to let you guess the meaning of Dan's name, positive or negative, what do you think after hearing all of this story, what it might be? It's negative. Now, because I am Dan, I know what that meaning is. You know what the meaning is? God is my judge. God definitely judged Dan. Because when Assyria decided to come down and begin destroying, guess who was first on the list? Dan. When you go to Revelation chapter, I should have put it in my notes. I believe it's chapter 7. There's a list of all of the tribes of Israel. But there's one that's missing. And it's the tribe of Dan. Now, maybe you've heard in Bible studies, the lost 10 tribes. Well, that is a fallacy. It's not true. But there is one tribe that you can call lost. It's Dan. Remember when I asked you at the beginning of this how much 1/16 and 4 foot is? How insignificant? Well, it's pretty significant because over time, it has terrible recourse. When you start with water way up here at Mount Hermon and it comes down to Dan, it's bubbling, it's powerful, it's rich with nutrients, it's cold, refreshing, it's moving quickly. But the further it goes down, that 1/16 of an inch and 4 feet, it goes down to the Sea of Galilee and it slows down some. It's kind of dammed up there because it's a rather large lake. And then it scoots down a little bit further and it gets slower, dirtier. To be honest, by the time you get down to the bottom of the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized and where Naaman went to get in the water, you remember what Naaman said? Am I gonna get down in that water? Because it was nasty by then. It was slow and stagnant. And then once you get the full 134 miles down there, going just a little 1/16 of an inch in 4 feet, the water becomes dead, immovable. It's got all kinds of nutrients, all kinds of minerals that could help somebody. But after all of that time, after that slow movement, that slow depression, it becomes worthless, and it literally becomes dead with no outlet. You know what that's exactly what sin does in our life. Satan he may tempt us with large things that he knows we won't fall to. But he will tempt us with little things. And the more we let those take place in our life, the deeper we get into sin. With the tribe of Dan, that's exactly what took place. It wasn't big things. It was just these little things. We know it was a promise to Jacob and Laban, but is that really? That was a long time ago. If we're worshiping the golden calves, what's the big deal? If we're not worshiping in Jerusalem, if we're worshiping up here, it's a whole lot easier to worship up here. What's the big deal? Little by little, they got further and further into sin. And eventually, it destroyed them. What does it say? Sin will take you further than you want to go and make you pay more than you ever want to pay. That's exactly the entire history of the tribe of Dan. Unfortunately for us, if God is our judge, he is a just judge. And unless we repent and turn from our wicked ways, he will be our judge and give us justice. And none of us want that. None of us want that. All right, so next week, we're going to talk about this little guy. Now, and it's actually, when I say little, that little head is like that tall. But we're going to talk about who that is. Yeah, little Ken doll. Ooh. You wouldn't want to play with that little doll, I'm telling you. No. That man's name is Ahab.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And we are going to talk about that next week when we talk about Megiddo. Well, let's pray. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.